Tay, poor girl, grabs a millionaire's hand and asks, "My mommy has a doctor's appointment and she's really scared. Could you come with us and pretend to be my dad?" What happens next is astounding. Nolan Briggs hated hospitals. The smell of antiseptic, the cold overhead lights, the constant beeping of machines. It all reminded him of when he lost his father years ago. But that Wednesday afternoon had brought him back to one. For a routine checkup, his doctor insisted he couldn't postpone again. Sitting in the waiting room, he was checking his emails on his phone. Business, meetings, appointments. The life of a 35-year-old man who had built his fortune from the ground up didn't have many empty moments. His San Francisco-based tech company had just closed a major deal, and the only thing he wanted was to get out of this place and back to his office. That's when he felt a tug on his knee. Nolan lowered his phone and found a pair of enormous brown eyes looking up at him. A little girl, with curly hair tied in lopsided pigtails and a yellow floral dress. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. She was clutching a small, time-worn teddy bear. "Hi," she said, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. Nolan looked around, searching for an adult who might be with the child, but he saw no one paying her any attention. "Hello?" he replied awkwardly. Kids were never his strong suit. "Toys, are you lost?" The girl shook her head. Her eyes never left his face, as if she were studying every detail. "My mommy went to the restroom," she explained, glancing quickly down the hall. "She'll be right back." "Oh, I see." Nolan smiled, relieved she wasn't lost. He turned his attention back to his phone, hoping the conversation was over. But the girl didn't move. She stood there, rocking back and forth on her heels, still watching him. He could feel her insistent gaze even without looking up. Finally, she took a deep breath and blurted it all out at once. "My mummy has a doctor's appointment and she's really scared. Could you come with us and pretend to be my dad?" The words hit Nolan like a punch. Of all the things he had expected to hear, that wasn't even close to being on the list. He glanced around nervously, making sure no one else had heard. "What?" was all he could manage to say. "Please," she insisted, her eyes pleading. "She cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep. And today she's more scared than ever." Nolan blinked several times, trying to process the bizarre request. "Wait a minute, you don't know me, I don't know you, and you want me to pretend to be your dad?" "Just for today," she replied, as if it were the most reasonable request in the world. Just during the appointment, This is crazy," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Your mum won't believe it." The girl bit her lower lip. "You don't look mean. You look nice. And you wear nice clothes." Nolan couldn't help a small smile at the childlike logic. "Thanks for the compliment, but this isn't something normal people do." "Your mum would be frightened. She's already scared," the little girl answered, with a wisdom that seemed too great for her age. "And sad. I wish she had someone big with her today." "She doesn't have anyone," Nolan asked, surprised. "Your real dad?" The girl shook her head. "I don't have a dad. Here it's just me and Mommy." Something in that simple, direct answer struck Nolan deeply. He knew the feeling of facing difficult situations alone. He knew the weight of loneliness. "What's your name?" he asked, putting his phone in his suit jacket pocket. "Hazel," she replied, extending her small hand as if she were a miniature adult. He shook her hand carefully. "I'm Nolan." "Nolan," she repeated, separating the syllables. "That's a different name. Yours is pretty too, Hazel, like the color of hazelnuts." She smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "My mommy says it's because of my eyes. They're brown like nuts and my hair." Something about the sincerity of this child completely disarmed Nolan. The man who commanded meetings with dozens of executives without batting an eye was now at a loss for how to refuse a 4-year-old's request. "Hazel, I promise I'll be good. I'll be the best daughter." She hugged the teddy bear tighter against her chest. "Ty, please." There was such a painful purity in that plea that Nolan found himself agreeing before he had even properly thought through what he was doing. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll go with you, but just for the appointment." Hazel's face lit up as if someone had switched on a light inside her. Without warning, she threw her arms around his neck in a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. Nolan barely had time to process what he had just agreed to when he heard a woman's voice coming from the hallway. Hazel! Hazel! Where are you? The girl released Nolan and turned towards the voice. Over here, Mommy. I found us a dad. A young woman appeared at the entrance to the waiting room, her face a mixture of worry and confusion. Hazel, what are you? And then Nolan's world stopped. There, standing just a few feet away from him, was Rachel Quinn. The same honey-colored eyes, the same brown hair, now shorter, falling gently over her shoulders. The same face shape he had memorized years ago when he swore he would spend the rest of his life waking up next to her. Rachel, the woman he had left in a small town in Ohio to chase his dreams in the big city. The woman he had promised to come back for once he was established, but never did. The woman whose heart he broke over the phone, saying their lives had taken different paths. Recognition hit her face like a wave. Surprise, confusion, and then something he couldn't identify. Nolan. The name came out as an incredulous whisper from her lips. Rachel, he replied, standing up slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter the surreal moment. Hazel looked back and forth between them, confused. You know each other. Rachel seemed to be struggling to breathe. Hazel, what did you do? He's going to be our dad today, Hazel explained with the simplicity only a child could possess. Because you're scared of the appointment. Rachel's expression wavered between embarrassment and vulnerability. Fight, Hazel, we can't just... Miss Quinn. A nurse appeared at the door of the waiting room. Dr. Stevens is ready to see you now. Rachel looked at the nurse, then at Hazel, and finally at Nolan. The fear in her eyes was so palpable that Nolan could almost feel it. You don't have to do this, she said quietly to him. I don't even know how she... I want to help, Nolan interrupted, surprising himself. If you'll let me. For a moment, Rachel looked like she was about to refuse, but then Hazel took her hand and Nolan's, joining the three of them in an unlikely circle. Please, Mommy, she pleaded. Rachel nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. When they entered the doctor's office, he greeted them with a polite smile. Ms. Quinn, glad you could make it, and I see you've brought company. Rachel didn't correct the doctor. Nolan stood by her side, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough to offer support. Little Hazel sat in a chair in the corner, swinging her legs that didn't reach the floor, watching the adults with attentive eyes. I have your test results, the doctor said, opening a folder. His tone shifted subtly, and Nolan felt Rachel stiffen. As we suspected, it's a carcinoma in the right breast. Stage 2. The words fell into the room like heavy stones. Cancer. Stage 2. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, her breathing visibly difficult. When she opened them again, she focused on Hazel, who was now playing with her bear, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. We'll need to start treatment as soon as possible, the doctor continued. Chemotherapy followed by surgery is the recommended protocol for your case. I have some available dates for next week. Nolan watched Rachel nod mechanically, as if she were listening to instructions on how to assemble furniture, not how to fight a disease that could take her life. And what about the prognosis? Nolan heard himself ask, surprised by his own initiative. The doctor adjusted his glasses. With immediate treatment, the chances are good. Stage 2 breast cancer has a 5-year survival rate of around 90% when treated properly. Rachel looked at Nolan, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He couldn't decipher if it was gratitude or anger for his intrusion. When the doctor finished explaining the next steps and left to get some documents, the silence in the room became almost solid. You don't have to stay, Rachel said finally, her voice just a little louder than a whisper. You've already done more than enough. I want to help, Nolan replied. He hesitated, then added, I can drive you home. After this, Rachel studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a complex code. Finally, she nodded. Okay. When the doctor returned with the papers, Rachel signed them quickly. Hazel came back to Nolan's side and held his hand, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Thanks for not telling him you're not my real dad, she whispered to him, so low that only he could hear. He squeezed her hand lightly. You're welcome. As they left the doctor's office, Nolan felt the weight of what had just happened. In less than an hour, his life had been turned upside down. The woman he had never been able to completely forget was back in his life, facing the toughest battle imaginable. And a little 4-year-old girl had chosen him, of all people, to be her father for a day. In the parking lot, while Rachel was distracted putting the documents in her purse, Hazel tugged on Nolan's suit jacket sleeve. "Are you really coming with us? All the way home?" He knelt down to her eye level. "I am. I promised, didn't I?" She smiled, that gap-toothed smile that was already starting to melt his heart. "Yes. And promises can't be broken." Nolan felt a pang in his chest. He had broken an important promise to Rachel a long time ago. Maybe this was a chance to fix at least a small part of the damage he had caused. What he didn't know yet was that one day was just the beginning. The drive from the hospital to Rachel's house was quiet. Hazel, sitting in the back of Nolan's luxury car, was the only one who seemed at ease, telling stories about her teddy bear and pointing things out the window. Rachel kept her eyes fixed on the road, as if every passing tree and building required her full attention. Nolan followed the directions she occasionally murmured, left at the next light, right after the supermarket, straight for 3 blocks. With each instruction, they moved away from the city center and into simpler neighborhoods. The houses got smaller, the yards less manicured, the streets narrower. A world completely different from the financial district where Nolan's office was located. "This is it," Rachel said finally, pointing to a small set of townhouses at the end of a quiet street. Nolan parked and looked at the place. It was a modest 2-story building, with paint peeling in a few spots, but it was clean and had a small pot of flowers by the entrance, so different from the glass and steel penthouse where he lived that they seemed to exist in parallel universes. "You don't have to come in," Rachel said, breaking his train of thought. "You've done a lot today." Before Nolan could answer, Hazel leaned between the front seats. "Come with us, I want to show you my drawings." Rachel shot Nolan an apologetic look. "Hazel, Mr. Briggs probably has things to do, and—" "I can come in for a moment," Nolan interrupted. He surprised himself with his own words. "If it's no bother," Rachel hesitated, her eyes studying his face as if searching for something. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." The inside of the house was like Rachel, simple, dignified, struggling to keep up appearances despite the hardships. The furniture was old but well-maintained. The walls needed a new coat of paint, but were decorated with colorful drawings made by Hazel. There were books stacked in strategic corners, many of them for children, a few well-worn novels. "It's not much," Rachel said, placing her purse on the small kitchen table. "But it's our home." Hazel took Nolan's hand and pulled him towards what looked like the living room. "Hey, come see my play corner." In the corner of the room was a small plastic table with child-sized chairs. Colored pencils, crayons, and sheets of paper were neatly organized. On the surrounding walls were drawings typical of a 4-year-old. Stick figures, houses with smoking chimneys, smiling suns in the corners of the pages. "This is my bear, Chocolate," Hazel pointed to a brown scribble. "And this is Mommy," a larger stick figure with brown hair. "And this is me," another, smaller stick figure holding hands with the larger one. Nolan noticed that in none of the drawings was there a figure that could be a father. "They're very beautiful," he said honestly. Rachel appeared in the doorway. "Hazel, would you like to make some juice for our guest?" The girl agreed enthusiastically and ran to the kitchen. Rachel waited until she was out of earshot. "Look, I appreciate what you did today. I don't know how she convinced you, but it helped." Nolan shook his head. "It was nothing, When I saw it was you, I couldn't just walk away." A heavy silence fell between them. 12 years of absence, unasked questions, explanations never given. "You look well," she said finally. "Successful, it seems." There was something in her voice, not envy or bitterness, but a weary observation. "As the company grew more than I expected," he replied, suddenly uncomfortable in his expensive suit and designer watch. "Fintech, we started small, but now—" "It was worth it then," Rachel completed. It wasn't a question. Nolan knew exactly what she was talking about. The day he said he had to leave, to follow his dreams in the city. that he would come back for her when he was established, the promise he never kept. Before he could answer, Hazel returned, carefully carrying a glass of orange juice. "I made this for you," she said proudly, handing the glass to Nolan. "Thank you, Hazel," he smiled, taking a sip. "It's delicious." Rachel watched the interaction with an expression Nolan couldn't decipher. She seemed simultaneously relieved by her daughter's happiness and worried about what would come next. "I'll make some coffee," she said, turning to the kitchen. Nolan followed her, leaving Hazel entertained with her drawings. The kitchen was tiny. An old stove, a refrigerator that made a constant humming sound, hand-painted cabinets. On the small table pushed against the wall, Nolan noticed piles of fabric, a portable sewing machine, and partially mended pieces of clothing. "How have things been?" he asked, gesturing to the house around them. Rachel turned on the coffee maker before answering. When she turned around, her face held a dignity that struck him deeply. "Hard. I worked as a waitress. They let me go when I started missing shifts for doctor's appointments. Now I do alterations and sewing to get by." She pointed to the fabrics on the table. "It's not much, but it pays the rent, and it lets me stay close to Hazel." Nolan felt a lump in his throat. 12 years ago, Rachel had been the brightest student in her class. Everyone had bet on her. And now she was here, struggling to survive day by day. And Hazel, her father. Rachel shook her head. "He's not in the picture. Never was. When he found out I was pregnant, he just disappeared." The coffee began to drip into the pot, filling the kitchen with its aroma. "I'm sorry," Nolan said, and he truly was. "You deserved more." Rachel shrugged, a gesture that tried to seem casual but carried the weight of years of struggle. "Life doesn't always give you what you deserve, does it? Some people get more, others less, but you just keep going." She looked into the living room, where Hazel was humming while she drew. "Time for her, mostly." She poured coffee into a simple but clean mug and handed it to Nolan. Their fingers brushed briefly, and they both recoiled as if the touch burned. "And now?" Nolan asked. "With the diagnosis," Rachel took a deep breath. "I'm going to fight. It's what I've always done. I got some government assistance for the treatment. The rest, well, we'll take it one day at a time." Nolan took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and good, despite its simplicity. "I could help," he offered. "Financially, I mean." Rachel's face hardened. "I don't need your charity, Nolan." "It's not charity, it's—" "Yes, it is," she interrupted. "And Hazel and I have managed just fine so far." Nolan didn't press. He knew that determined look. It was the same one she had when she decided to pull an all-nighter studying for a tough exam years ago. Hazel appeared at the kitchen door, holding a freshly made drawing. "Look what I made!" she exclaimed, showing the paper. It was a simple drawing, 3 stick figures. A small one with curly hair, a larger one with long hair, and an even larger one wearing what looked like a suit. "It's us," Hazel explained, pointing to each figure. "Me, Mommy, and you." Nolan felt something tighten in his chest. He looked at Rachel, who had an expression of alarm mixed with resignation. "It's very beautiful, Hazel," he said softly. "Can I keep it?" The girl nodded, handing him the drawing. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" The innocent question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Nolan looked at Rachel, who averted her gaze. "Hazel, Mr. Briggs has his own life," she said gently. "He was just helping us out today." Hazel's smile faltered, but she tried to maintain her composure. "Okay." Nolan carefully folded the drawing and put it in the inner pocket of his suit jacket. It was time to go, he knew. Staying longer would only make things more complicated. "Thanks for the coffee," he said, standing up, "and for letting me come in." Rachel walked him to the door, while Hazel went back to her drawings. On the doorstep, Nolan hesitated. "So if you need anything at all, we'll be fine," Rachel replied, her tone ending the subject. He nodded and turned to leave. As he walked to his car, he felt the weight of the drawing in his pocket, along with the weight of the choices he had made years ago. The decision to leave, to follow his dreams instead of love. The promise never kept. He started the engine and took one last look at the house. Rachel had already closed the door. Nolan drove back to his world of skyscrapers and important meetings, but his heart remained unsettled. stuck in that small house with its silent battles and stubborn dignity. And a 4-year-old girl who, for a few hours, had called him Dad. 3 days after his visit to Rachel and Hazel's house, Nolan found himself standing on the same sidewalk again, looking at the front door. In his hands, a package wrapped in colorful paper. He hadn't planned on coming back. In fact, he had told himself it would be better to keep his distance, that complications were the last thing Rachel needed now, that he had a company to run, meetings to conduct, goals to meet. But here he was, ringing the doorbell at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening. Rachel opened the door, surprise written on her tired face. "Nolan." "Hi," he said, suddenly feeling out of place in his expensive suit. "I was just passing by and thought I'd see how you two are doing." It was an obvious lie. No one just passed by this residential neighborhood unless they lived there. Rachel seemed to assess the situation for a moment before opening the door wider. "Come in. Hazel is just finishing her bath." The house looked the same, but Nolan noticed some papers on the kitchen table, prescriptions, pamphlets about cancer treatment, a calendar with dates marked in red. "Di, how are you?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Rachel shrugged. "I start chemo on Monday. I'm preparing myself mentally." She pointed to the papers. "Reading everything I can to know what to expect." "And Hazel, does she know?" "I told her I'm sick and need to take strong medicine, that I might get tired and even lose my hair." She asked a lot of questions, but she seems to be handling it well. Rachel ran a hand over her face. "Kids are stronger than we think." The sound of quick footsteps on the stairs interrupted the conversation. Hazel appeared at the kitchen door, with wet hair and wearing unicorn pajamas. Her eyes widened when she saw Nolan. "You came back," she exclaimed, running to hug his legs. Nolan felt a warmth spread through his chest at the genuine welcome. He couldn't remember the last time someone had been so happy to see him. "I brought you something," he said, handing her the wrapped package. Hazel looked at her mother as if asking for permission. Rachel nodded, and the girl began to tear the paper with excitement. Inside was a rag doll with a yellow dress, a case of colored pencils with 24 different colors, and a large drawing pad with thick, white pages. "Wow," Hazel breathed, touching the gifts with reverence. She held up the doll, examining its embroidered face and yarn hair. "Thank you. I've always wanted one of these." Her eyes sparkled with a joy so pure that Nolan felt his throat tighten. "How about we break in this new drawing pad?" he suggested, pointing to the living room table. Hazel ran to set up her new art station, carrying the doll under her arm. Nolan turned to Rachel, worried he might have overstepped a boundary. "I hope you don't mind." "I didn't want to seem like I was—" "It's okay," she interrupted. A small smile appeared on her face, the first he had seen since their reunion. "She loves to draw, but we've been saving on supplies. This will keep her busy for weeks." In the living room, Hazel had already arranged the pencils by color and opened the drawing pad to the first page. "Come on, Nolan," she called, pronouncing his name in the same peculiar way as before. He sat on the floor beside her, aware that his suit was not made for this kind of activity. "What are we going to draw?" "A family of elephants," Hazel decided, already grabbing the gray pencil. For the next hour, Nolan completely forgot who he was on the outside. He was no longer the CEO of a tech company, the man who closed million-dollar deals, who had a schedule so tight his assistants had to book his meals. He was just a man sitting on the floor, drawing clumsy elephants next to a child who laughed at his attempts and corrected him with the serious wisdom of a 4-year-old. From the kitchen doorway, Rachel watched the scene. There was a lump in her throat she couldn't explain. Anger that he had left years ago, gratitude that he was here now, fear that Hazel would get too attached to someone who would inevitably leave again. But there was also something else, something she hadn't felt in so long she had almost forgotten what it was like. Relief. Relief that she wasn't alone, at least for one night. Relief to share the burden, even if briefly. The first visit turned into 2, then 3, then so many they stopped counting. Nolan started showing up regularly, 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes he brought food, other times a new book for Hazel or flowers for the house. He would show up after work, his suit wrinkled after a long day, but always with energy for Hazel. He learned how to braid her hair, to tell crazy stories about adventurous princesses, to build forts with sheets in the living room. Rachel didn't understand at first. She expected him to disappear after 1 or 2 visits, that his curiosity or guilt, whatever had brought him back, would quickly run out. But he kept coming back. On the eve of Rachel's first day of chemotherapy, Nolan showed up with a full dinner and a proposal. "I want to go with you tomorrow," he said, when Hazel was distracted watching cartoons. "And I can stay with her during the sessions, if you'll let me." Rachel frowned. "Don't you have a company to run?" "I do," he agreed. "So I also have a competent vice president and the ability to work remotely." He hesitated, then added, "Rachel, I want to help. Let me do this." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to maintain emotional distance, well-defined boundaries, but the truth was she was terrified of the treatment, the side effects, the possibility of Hazel being left alone if something went wrong. "Okay," she finally agreed, "but let's make it clear to Hazel that it's temporary. I don't want her to get her hopes up." Nolan nodded, ignoring the pang he felt in his chest at those words. The chemotherapy room was large, with reclining chairs arranged in a semicircle. Rachel sat in the one indicated by the nurse, trying to ignore the fear that made her stomach churn. "It's going to be okay," Nolan said, holding her hand briefly before stepping away. "Hazel and I will be in the cafeteria. Text me when you're done." Rachel nodded, grateful for the privacy. She didn't want Hazel to see her like this, vulnerable, scared, with needles in her arm. In the hospital cafeteria, Nolan and Hazel settled at a table near the window. He had brought the drawing pad and pencils, and Hazel wasted no time. "I'm going to draw something special for Mommy," she announced, carefully selecting her colors. Nolan watched as she worked with intense concentration, her tongue sticking out the corner of her mouth, her eyebrows furrowed with effort. "What are you drawing?" he asked after a few minutes. "It's a surprise," she replied without looking up. He smiled and took the opportunity to check some emails on his phone. His assistant had rescheduled 2 meetings and sent documents for review. He replied quickly, aware that his priority at that moment was sitting across from him, not in his office. "Done," Hazel announced finally, turning the drawing for him to see. It was simple and colorful, 3 figures holding hands under a smiling sun. A small one with curls, a medium one with long hair, and a taller one wearing what looked like a suit. "I drew us," she explained, pointing to each figure, "because now we're like a team." Nolan felt something break and rebuild inside him with those words. "Our team?" he repeated, his voice slightly hoarse. "Yes," Hazel continued, excited. "Mommy said that teams stick together even when it's hard, and they help each other, like us." She offered him the drawing proudly. "You can show it to her when we go get her." Nolan accepted the paper with more care than he had ever held any $1 million contract. "It's perfect, Hazel." 2.5 hours later, Rachel sent a short text. "Finished." They found her at the exit of the treatment room. She was pale, with deep, dark circles under her eyes, but she was on her feet and trying to smile. "How was it?" Nolan asked quietly, as Hazel skipped ahead of them down the hall. "Exhausting," Rachel replied, "but bearable. The worst part will probably come later, when the side effects start." She swayed slightly, and Nolan put his hand on her waist to steady her. "Thank you," she murmured, not pulling away from his touch. In the car, Hazel was excited to show her the drawing. "Look, Mommy, I drew us." Rachel looked at the paper her daughter was holding, and a tired but genuine smile lit up her face. "It's beautiful, my love. It's the 3 of us. A team." Rachel looked at Nolan in the rearview mirror, a silent question in her eyes. He just smiled back, unable to find the right words. That night, after putting Hazel to bed and making sure Rachel was comfortable, Nolan returned to his empty, luxurious apartment. Before going to sleep, he carefully took Hazel's drawing out of his pocket and placed it in his wallet. 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. A team. It was strange how, in just a few weeks, these 2 people had filled a void he didn't even know existed. How the nights he didn't go to their house seemed longer and emptier than they had ever been. Who would have thought he would find his place in the routine of a single mother, fighting cancer, and a 4-year-old girl who had chosen him, of all people, to be her father for a day. And that one day kept extending, with none of them seeming willing to put an end to it. 3 weeks of chemotherapy had taken their toll. Rachel had lost weight. Her skin had taken on a grayish tone, and her once shiny hair was beginning to fall out in clumps that she tried to hide from Hazel with colorful scarves. Despite everything, she remained strong. She continued to do small sewing jobs when she had the energy. She got up every morning to make her daughter's breakfast. She smiled whenever Hazel entered the room, as if a strength switch were automatically flipped. Nolan visited almost daily now. He brought food, helped with household chores, took Hazel to the park so Rachel could rest. He had rearranged his work schedule, delegated responsibilities, started holding meetings via video conference. His life had completely transformed in a few short weeks, and surprisingly, he didn't miss his old routine. That Thursday afternoon, he was in his office finalizing a presentation when his cell phone vibrated. Hazel's name appeared on the screen. He had given her an old phone for emergencies, programmed only with his number. Hazel, are you okay? There were only sobs on the other end. Hazel, breathe and talk to me. What happened? Mommy is sick. The small voice was broken by crying. She fell in the bathroom and can't get up. Nolan's heart raced. Is she conscious? Can she talk to you? Yes, but she's very weak. She said not to call an ambulance because it's just weakness. I'm on my way now. Stay with her. Don't leave her side. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Nolan hung up, already running for the door, shouting instructions to his assistant as he passed. The traffic seemed to be conspiring against him. Every red light, every slow car in front of him was torture. He tried calling Rachel, but she didn't answer. He called Hazel again. How is she? I helped her get to bed, Hazel replied, sounding strangely grown up in her concern. But she's shaking a lot. I'm almost there. You were very brave, Hazel. When he finally arrived at the house, he found the front door unlocked. Hazel was waiting for him at the entrance, her small face streaked with tears, clutching the doll he had given her like a protective talisman. Second room upstairs, she pointed. Nolan took the stairs 2 at a time. He found Rachel curled up in bed, as pale as the sheet covering her, shaking uncontrollably. Rachel, he called softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. She opened her eyes with effort. You didn't have to come. I just need to rest a bit. Nolan placed his hand on her forehead. She was feverish. This isn't just exhaustion. It could be a reaction to the chemo or an infection. Your immune system is low. I don't want to go to the hospital, she murmured. Hazel can't be alone. She won't be. I'm here. He picked up his phone. I'm calling your doctor. While he was talking to Rachel's oncologist, Nolan felt a tug on his shirt. Hazel was beside him, her big eyes filled with fear. Is Mommy going to die? She asked in a whisper. Nolan hung up the phone and knelt down to her level. No, Hazel. Your mum is very tired, and the medicine she takes to get better sometimes makes people feel sick, but she's going to get better. Promise? There was so much weight in that single word, so much fear, so much trust placed in him. I promise I'll do everything I can to help her. Nolan turned his attention back to Rachel. The doctor said it's likely febrile neutropenia, a drop in defense cells with a fever. We need to take you to the hospital for antibiotics. Rachel tried to protest, but she had no strength. Nolan lifted her into his arms, startled by how light she was, as if the illness were consuming her from the inside out. Hazel, get a change of clothes for your mom and some toiletries. We're going to the hospital. The girl ran to the closet, determined in her mission. Nolan carried Rachel down the stairs and gently placed her in the back seat of the car. Can Hazel stay with me? I don't want her to see, Rachel murmured, her eyes closing against her will. Don't worry about that now. We'll take it one step at a time. At the hospital, Nolan navigated the bureaucracy with Hazel by his side, holding his hand like an anchor. When the doctors took Rachel for treatment, he found himself in a sterile waiting room with a 4-year-old child, looking to him for security. I'm hungry, she said after an hour of waiting. Nolan realized it was past 6, and neither of them had eaten. He found the hospital cafeteria and bought sandwiches and juice. As they ate, he noticed Hazel's eyes closing with exhaustion. Without a second thought, he picked her up and settled her against his chest. She nestled her head on his shoulder, the doll clutched against her body. "Nolan," she murmured sleepily, "you're not going to leave, are you?" "I'm not going anywhere," he replied, feeling her weight relax against him. Hazel slept in his arms for 2 hours while he waited for news. When the doctor finally appeared, Nolan stood up carefully so as not to wake her. "Miss Quinn is responding well to the antibiotics," the doctor informed him. "Neutropenia is a common complication of chemotherapy. We'll keep her for observation tonight, but she'll likely be able to go home tomorrow. Can I see her?" "Yes, but she's sedated. She'll be resting until tomorrow." Nolan thanked him and sat back down, adjusting Hazel in his arms. It was almost 10 at night. It made no sense to wake the child to see her sleeping mother. It was better to take her home and put her to sleep in her own bed. But then he realized he couldn't just leave Hazel alone at the house. Rachel would be in the hospital, and the girl needed supervision. He made a quick decision. He took Hazel to his apartment. The child woke up briefly during the drive. "Where's Mommy?" "She's resting at the hospital. She'll be better soon. You're going to sleep at my house tonight, okay?" Hazel nodded and went back to sleep. Nolan's apartment occupied the penthouse of a modern building in the city center. Sleek minimalist, decorated in shades of grey and black, the kind of place featured in architecture magazines, but one that never really felt like a home. He carried a sleeping Hazel through the private elevator and laid her on his king-size bed. She looked tiny amidst the dark sheets. Nolan took off her shoes, covered her with a light blanket, and left the bathroom light on in case she woke up disoriented. Then he took a quick shower and settled on the living room sofa, physically and emotionally exhausted. The next day, when Rachel was discharged, Nolan took her directly to his home. She was too weak to protest, and when she saw Hazel running to hug her at the apartment entrance, she just gave Nolan a grateful look. He set them up in the guest room and hired a private nurse to help with her care. Rachel needed intravenous antibiotics for a few more days and absolute rest. On the third day, when Rachel was more lucid and a little stronger, Nolan sat on the edge of her bed. "I need to talk to you." She nodded, preparing herself for what was to come. "What happened yesterday can't happen again," he said firmly. "You being alone, Hazel having to deal with an emergency." "I know," Rachel sighed. "I'll look for someone to stay with us. Maybe a part-time nurse." "Come live with me," Nolan interrupted, "so I can take care of you properly." Rachel stared at him, surprised. "What? Both of you, here, during the treatment at least?" "Nolan, we can't just invade your life like this." "Life? You're already doing too much." "I'm not doing enough." He held her hand gently. "Rachel, you need to focus on getting better, and Hazel needs stability. There's plenty of space here, 24-hour security in the building, and I'm 10 minutes from the hospital." Rachel looked away, her face a mix of conflicting emotions. "It's complicated." "I know, but it's practical." He squeezed her hand lightly. "I'm not proposing anything other than help, Rachel, a safe place during a difficult time." Before she could answer, Hazel entered the room carrying a freshly made drawing. "Mommy, look what I made. It's Nolan's building, and the three of us in the window." Rachel smiled at her daughter, taking the drawing. "It's beautiful, my love." Hazel turned to Nolan. "Can I make more drawings to put on your fridge?" Nolan looked at Rachel, a silent question in his eyes. "Hazel," Rachel called softly, "what would you think about staying here for a while, until Mommy gets completely better?" The girl's eyes widened. "Live here, for real?" "Only if you want to," Nolan added quickly. Hazel looked around, considering, "Is there space to hang my drawings?" Nolan smiled. "There's a whole space just for you." The joy on Hazel's face was instantaneous, but she soon became serious. "And my things, my books and my toy box?" "We can bring everything," Nolan assured her. "So and buy a new bookshelf just for your books." That seemed to seal the deal for Hazel, who left the room skipping to explore her new temporary home. Rachel watched her daughter leave and then turned to Nolan. Are you sure about this? It's not a small responsibility. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. There was something in the way he said it, a quiet conviction without drama or hesitation that made Rachel finally nod. Okay, but we're paying rent. Nolan opened his mouth to protest, but her determined look made him reconsider. A symbolic amount, then. And it's temporary, she added. Until I finish treatment and get my strength back. Deal. 3 days later, Rachel and Hazel's few belongings were moved into Nolan's apartment. There wasn't much. Clothes, books, toys, Rachel's sewing machine. A few personal items. It all fit in just 2 cars. To Hazel's surprise, Nolan had transformed the home office into a child's bedroom. Freshly painted walls in light blue, a new bed with a star-patterned quilt, and a special drawing table by the window that had the best view of the city. Is it all mine? She asked in disbelief. All yours, Nolan confirmed, including that wall. It's your private art gallery. He pointed to an entire wall covered in corkboard, ready to receive her drawings. Rachel's room was next door, simple but elegant, with a comfortable armchair by the window and a small desk where she could do her sewing work when she felt up to it. In the days that followed, Nolan's once pristine and cold apartment began to come to life. Colorful drawings on the refrigerator, children's books on the coffee table, a pair of small slippers in the hallway, a half-finished mug of tea left on the kitchen counter. The first few mornings were strange, with the 3 of them moving cautiously around each other, learning the rhythms and habits of closer cohabitation, but gradually a routine began to form. Nolan would get up early and make breakfast before leaving for the office. Rachel would manage her medications and supervise the homework Hazel's teacher sent. He would come back at lunchtime to check on them and often worked from home in the afternoon. At night, they ate dinner together. Sometimes they ordered food. Other times Nolan cooked something simple he had learned from online tutorials. Afterwards, they would watch a movie, or Hazel would show off her new drawings. There were difficult moments, of course. Days when Rachel spent hours in the bathroom throwing up after chemo, nights when Hazel woke up crying, scared by nightmares about her mother leaving, moments when the forced intimacy brought old resentments and unresolved grievances between Rachel and Nolan to the surface. But there were also surprisingly sweet moments. Hazel teaching Nolan how to braid her doll's hair. Rachel laughing genuinely at a silly joke during dinner. The 3 of them falling asleep on the sofa while watching an animated movie on a Friday night. Slowly, without any of them fully realizing it, something new was forming in that apartment. Not just a temporary living arrangement, not just a practical setup, a family, an unlikely family, born of necessity and illness, of fear and redemption. A family that none of them had planned, but that now, in the silence of the night, when Nolan checked on a sleeping Hazel before going to his own room, felt strangely right. As if all the mistakes and successes, all the good and bad choices they had made throughout their lives, had been necessary steps to lead them to exactly that moment, to that unlikely configuration that, against all odds, worked. 2 weeks had passed since the move to Nolan's apartment. Rachel's treatment was following its course, difficult, painful, but necessary. The doctors were optimistic. The tumor had shrunk a little, a positive response to chemotherapy. The removal surgery was scheduled for the end of the month. That Wednesday started like any other. Nolan left early for an important meeting, promising to meet them at the hospital for Rachel's 2 o'clock chemo session. The private nurse who helped on treatment days arrived promptly at 10, bringing a gentle smile and experienced hands. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, while checking Rachel's vital signs. "Tired," Rachel admitted, "but nothing out of the ordinary." The nurse jotted something down on her clipboard. "Are you eating well?" "When I can keep food down." In the next room, Hazel was drawing with concentration, pencils scattered across the floor in a colorful chaos. Her private tutor had just left after the morning lesson. Drawing was Hazel's way of processing everything that was happening. Her recent drawings showed many hospitals, people in white coats, and her mother always with a scarf on her head, but smiling. At noon, the nurse helped Rachel get ready for the hospital. A warm bath, comfortable clothes, a light snack she could digest. "Mommy, can I bring my drawing pad?" Hazel asked, already knowing she would spend a few hours in the waiting room. "Of course, sweetheart. And how about we bring a book too?" The car Nolan had hired arrived promptly at 1 o'clock. Rachel, Hazel, and the nurse got in, and the driver, already familiar with the routine, drove calmly to the hospital. Nolan was already waiting for them at the entrance, having left his meeting early. "Jazz, how are my girls?" he asked, bending down to receive Hazel's enthusiastic hug. "Ready to get this over with," Rachel replied with a small smile. The four of them headed to the oncology department. The medical team already knew them well. The brave mother, the daughter with the easy smile, the ever-present man, and the efficient nurse. "Let's see how your tests look today," said the lead doctor, analyzing the recent results. "Your blood levels are a little lower than we'd like. You might feel more fatigue after this session." Rachel nodded. She was used to the warnings, to the anticipation of side effects. It was part of the process. "Hazel, how about we go get a hot chocolate while your mum starts her treatment?" Nolan suggested, knowing that the initial part, setting up the medication, the needles, the tubes, still scared the girl. "Can I, Mom?" Rachel agreed. "Go ahead. We'll meet up later." The nurse stayed with Rachel while Nolan took Hazel to the cafeteria. It was a little ritual they had developed, a time for the girl to breathe outside the hospital environment, to ask questions she might not want to ask in front of her mother. "Is Mommy's hair going to grow back after she gets better?" Hazel asked, carefully blowing on her hot chocolate. "It will," Nolan replied, stronger and more beautiful than before. "And the surgery? Is it going to hurt a lot?" Nolan chose his words carefully. "She'll be asleep during the surgery, so she won't feel any pain. Afterwards, yes, it will hurt a little, but the doctors will give her medicine to help, and we'll be there to take care of her." Hazel nodded, processing the information, "Like you take care of us." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Something she had observed and accepted as part of her new reality. "Yes," Nolan replied, feeling a wave of emotion he hadn't expected. "Like I take care of you." When they returned to the chemo ward, Rachel's medication was already flowing through her veins. She looked paler than usual, but tried to stay alert as Hazel showed her the new drawing she had made in the cafeteria. "It's beautiful, my love," she said, her voice a little weak. Nolan exchanged a look with the nurse, who was monitoring Rachel's vitals more frequently than usual. "Her pressure is a little low," she murmured to him. "We'll keep an eye on it." The chemo session usually lasted 3 hours. In the second hour, Rachel began to tremble slightly. "Just a little cold," she said when Nolan asked. "It's normal." But it wasn't normal. The nurse checked her temperature, feverish, a possible sign of infection, dangerous for someone with a compromised immune system. "I'm going to call the doctor," she said, her professional tone masking her concern. Hazel realized something was wrong. Her eyes darted from her mother to Nolan, wide and scared. "Why don't you go pick out a book in the reading room? The one at the end of the hall," Nolan suggested, trying to momentarily distance her. The girl hesitated but eventually agreed. As soon as she left, Rachel grabbed Nolan's hand. "If something happens to me, nothing is going to happen," he interrupted firmly. "Mike, it's just a complication. We'll handle it." The doctor arrived quickly, assessed the situation, and ordered the immediate halt of the chemotherapy. Rachel would need to be kept under observation, receive antibiotics. When they tried to help her move to a gurney, it happened. Rachel stood up, took 2 steps, and her eyes rolled back. Her legs gave out. Nolan caught her before she hit the floor. She had fainted. The doctor and nurse acted with trained efficiency, but Nolan barely registered what they were saying. All he saw was Rachel's pale face in his arms, her lips colorless, her eyelids closed. "Room 304, someone said. "Stat." He stood in the hallway while the medical team worked. Minutes felt like hours. Through the glass of the door, he saw quick movements, equipment being connected, urgent voices giving orders. "Nolan." Hazel's small voice brought him back to reality. She was standing in the middle of the hallway, hugging a book to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. "Where's Mommy?" How could he explain? How could he tell a 4-year-old girl that her mother, her only safe harbor, had collapsed? that doctors were now fighting to stabilize her. He knelt to her level, trying to keep his voice calm. "Your mum is feeling very tired. The doctors are taking care of her in that room. Is she going to die?" The question came out as a breath, laden with a fear no child should ever know. "No," Nolan answered with a certainty he didn't truly feel. "She's sick, and sometimes sick people need extra help, but the doctors are very good at what they do." Hazel nodded, but her eyes filled with tears. Nolan pulled her into a hug, feeling her small sobs against his chest. "I'm here," he murmured, stroking her hair. "I'm here with you." An hour later, the doctor came out of the room. His face was serious, but not grim. "We've managed to stabilize her. It was a reaction to the medication combined with dehydration and exhaustion. We're going to keep her in the hospital tonight for observation." "Is she going to be okay?" Nolan asked, his hand still holding Hazel's. "With proper rest and monitoring, yes. But we need to adjust her chemotherapy protocol. Her body is reacting too intensely." "Can we see her?" The doctor hesitated. "She's conscious, but very weak." "Short visits, please." When they entered the room, Rachel looked small and fragile in the hospital bed. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, constant beeps marking her vital signs. She opened her eyes when she heard the door, and her gaze immediately sought out Hazel. "Hi, my love," she said, her voice just a whisper. Hazel ran to the side of the bed but stopped before touching her mother, intimidated by the equipment. "It's okay," Rachel assured her. "You can hold my hand." The girl took her mother's hand carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Are you better?" "I am, just very tired." Hazel showed her the book she had chosen. "Can I read to you?" "So you can rest?" Rachel smiled faintly. "I'd love that." Nolan helped Hazel get settled in a chair beside the bed, where she began to read the story. More from memory of the pictures than actually reading the words. Rachel watched her with half-closed eyes, fighting against exhaustion to stay conscious. When Hazel finished the book, the nurse came in to check her vitals. "I think your mum needs to rest a little now," she said gently. "How about you come back later?" Hazel looked at her mother, reluctant to leave. "It's going to be okay," Rachel assured her. "You can come back after dinner. Promise you won't go anywhere." The innocent question carried so much weight that Nolan felt his throat tighten. "I promise," Rachel replied, gently squeezing her daughter's hand. "I'll be right here waiting for you." When Hazel left with the nurse to get some juice, Rachel finally looked at Nolan. There was shame in her eyes. "You shouldn't have to see this," she murmured. Nolan moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. "See what? This. Me like this. Weak. Dependent." She looked away. It's not how you knew me." Nolan gently took her hand. "I watched my mother go through this, alone." His voice trembled slightly with the painful memory. "It won't be like that with you." Rachel looked at him, surprised. He had never talked about his mother before. "I was 16, he continued. "Lung cancer, advanced stage. My father had left years ago. It was just the two of us." He took a deep breath. "She refused to let me see her at her worst. She'd send me to school, to friends, houses. She fought alone. When she died, my biggest regret was not being there to hold her hand." A tear rolled down Rachel's face. "I'm so sorry. I'm not telling you this for you to feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand there's no shame in needing help. There's no weakness in letting someone see you vulnerable." Rachel closed her eyes, absorbing his words. "Thank you," she whispered finally, "for being here. Always." When Hazel returned, Rachel had already fallen asleep. The nurse explained that this was normal, that her body needed to rest to recover. "Let's go back later," Nolan said to Hazel. "In the meantime, how about we get something tasty for dinner?" Night fell slowly over the city. In the hospital cafeteria, Nolan watched Hazel push food around her plate without really eating. "You don't like the pasta?" She shrugged. "I'm not hungry. I get it. But we need to eat to stay strong, especially on tough days." Hazel looked at him with those big, serious eyes. "Are you scared too?" The question caught him off guard. His instinct was to protect her, to say no, that adults don't feel fear. but something in her gaze demanded honesty. "Yes," he admitted. "I'm scared too." Strangely, that seemed to comfort her. She picked up her fork and started eating small bites. When they returned to Rachel's room, she was still sleeping. The nurse said she probably wouldn't wake up until the next morning. "I think we should go home," Nolan suggested. "We'll come back early tomorrow." But Hazel refused to leave. "I promised her I'd come back. What if she wakes up and doesn't find me?" Nolan understood the child's fear. "Okay, we can stay a little longer." They ended up spending the night at the hospital. Hazel fell asleep on the small sofa in the room, using Nolan's lap as a pillow. He took off his own jacket and carefully covered her, watching her little face relax in the deep sleep of childhood. He looked at Rachel in the hospital bed, at Hazel asleep on his lap. He felt something expand inside his chest, a certainty he couldn't quite name. They were already a family, he realized, not on paper, not by declaration, but in practice. In the small gestures, the shared worries, the silent comfort of each other's presence. In the morning, Rachel woke up stronger. The color had partially returned to her face, and the doctors were pleased with her vital signs. "We can go home this afternoon," she announced when Hazel woke up. "But I need to be more careful." "Rest more. I'll help," Hazel promised solemnly. "I'll be very quiet when you're resting." Rachel smiled, stroking her daughter's face. "You already help so much just by being you." That afternoon, after receiving the medical instructions and new medications, they returned to the apartment. Rachel was weak but managed to walk with Nolan's help. After Hazel went to sleep, exhausted from the stressful day, Rachel found Nolan on the balcony. The night was clear, the city lights twinkling below them. "Thank you," she said, joining him at the railing. "For yesterday, for everything." Nolan nodded. They stood in silence for a moment, just watching the city. "Hazel's father left me when he found out I was pregnant," Rachel said suddenly. "I raised her alone, and now I'm scared of the surgery, scared of leaving her." Her voice broke on the last phrase. The fear she had kept under control during the day to protect Hazel finally found an outlet. Nolan turned to face her. Without a word, he took his wallet from his pocket and removed something from inside. An old photograph, yellowed at the edges. He held it out to her. Rachel took the photo carefully. In it, two teenagers smiled at the camera, arms around each other in front of a tree. She was 17, with long hair and a floral dress. He was 18, thin and awkward, looking at her as if she were the center of the universe. "You kept it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because you were the only woman I ever loved." Rachel looked up from the photo to his face. "And now?" Nolan held her hands, the photo between them like a bridge connecting past and present. "Now I want to face this with you. And with Hazel." They weren't grand words of eternal love. They weren't impossible promises to keep. It was something simpler, and perhaps for that very reason, more true. An offer of presence, of commitment, of partnership. Rachel didn't answer with words. She moved closer and rested her head on his shoulder, a wordless gesture of acceptance. They stayed like that for a long time, fingers intertwined, the photo between them, the city pulsing below. The future was still uncertain, full of challenges and possible pain. But in that moment, in the quiet of the night, something had fundamentally changed. They were no longer alone in their struggles. The eve of the surgery arrived faster than any of them were prepared for. Despite the doctors reinforcing that the procedure was standard and the chances of success were high, a silent tension hung over the apartment. During dinner, Hazel talked more than usual, as if trying to fill the adults' worried silence with stories from her private tutor, the drawings she had made, and plans for when winter came and they could build snowmen. Nolan responded with enthusiasm, feeding the conversation, while Rachel smiled and nodded, her plate almost untouched in front of her. "You need to eat," Nolan said softly when Hazel left the table to get a drawing she wanted to show. "I'm not hungry," Rachel replied, pushing pasta around her plate. After a moment, she added, "I'm afraid I'll get sick during the night because of tomorrow's anesthesia." It was an excuse, and they both knew it. Fear had stolen her appetite. After dinner, Nolan helped Hazel with her bath and bedtime routine. He read 2 stories instead of the usual one and sat by her bed until she fell asleep, holding her small hand in his. When he returned to the living room, he found Rachel on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. She was wearing a thick robe over her pajamas, protecting herself from the cold night wind. "Is she asleep?" Rachel asked without turning around. "Yes, she asked for 2 stories tonight." Rachel nodded, still with her back to him. Her shoulders were tense, her posture rigid. "The doctors said the surgery has a 95% chance of success," Nolan offered, approaching her. "Those are excellent numbers." "I know." She finally turned to face him. Her eyes were welling up with tears. But what about the other 5%? Nolan had no answer for that. Statistics were cold, impersonal. They didn't acknowledge that for Hazel, her mother was 100% of her world. "I need to ask you something," Rachel said, her voice almost a whisper. "Something I have no right to ask, but anything," he replied without hesitation. Rachel took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. A tear escaped and slid down her pale cheek. "If something happens to me, will you take care of her?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a practical request about who would care for Hazel in the worst-case scenario. It was an acknowledgement of what had formed between them in recent weeks, an unconventional family, born of necessity, but strengthened by something deeper. "She's already mine," Nolan replied, his voice firm, despite the lump in his throat. "But I promise, with everything that I am." Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, letting more tears escape. When she opened them again, there was relief in her gaze, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. Nolan took a step forward and pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist, sinking into the hug, as if she could finally let go of all the strength she had been holding on to for so long. Her shoulders trembled with silent sobs. It's going to be okay," he murmured against her hair. "And I'll be there when you wake up. We both will be." They stayed like that for a long time, embraced under the starry sky, the city pulsing below them, indifferent to the small and enormous dramas unfolding in every lit window. When they finally separated, Rachel ran her hands over her face, wiping away the tears. "I need to try to sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Nolan nodded. "Do you want me to stay with you until you fall asleep?" A simple offer, yet laden with intimacy. Not sexual, but of a deeper kind. The comfort of someone's presence during the darkest hours of the night. "Please," she replied. He followed her to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed as she settled under the covers. He held her hand, and they sat in silence. Words unnecessary. Eventually, Rachel's breathing became deeper and more regular. Even so, Nolan stayed for a while longer, as if his presence could somehow ward off nightmares and fears. When he finally left the room, it wasn't to his own but to the living room sofa. Somehow it felt wrong to be too far away that night. The morning came with the cold light of autumn. Nolan woke up before his alarm, tense and alert. He prepared breakfast, something light for Rachel, who couldn't eat much before the anesthesia, and animal-shaped pancakes for Hazel, an attempt to maintain normalcy. Hazel appeared in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her hair disheveled, clutching her favorite doll to her chest. "Is Mummy going to the hospital today?" she asked, climbing onto her stool at the kitchen island. "Yes," Nolan replied, placing an elephant-shaped pancake on her plate. "The doctors are going to take out the sick part of her so she can get all better." The explanation was simplified, but true. It was what they had decided to tell Hazel, enough for her to understand, without unnecessary frightening details. "And when is she coming back?" "Probably tomorrow or the day after. It will depend on how she feels." Hazel nodded, absorbing the information as she ate small pieces of her pancake. "I made her a present," she announced after a few moments. "Really? What is it?" "A special drawing, for her to see when she wakes up from the surgery." Nolan smiled, feeling a wave of affection for this child who faced everything with such courage and kindness. "I'm sure she'll love it." Rachel entered the kitchen shortly after, already dressed and ready. Her face was pale but determined. There was a quiet strength about her this morning, as if she had made peace with what was to come. "Good morning, my loves," she said, kissing the top of Hazel's head, the naturalness with which the phrase came out. My loves, including Nolan in that intimate circle, did not go unnoticed by either of them. Rachel blushed slightly, but didn't take back what she said. Breakfast proceeded with a forced normalcy. They talked about the weather, about the book Hazel was reading, more memorizing the story from the pictures, about small, safe things. When it was time to leave, Hazel ran to her room and came back with a colorful envelope. For Mommy to open when she wakes up, she explained, solemnly handing the envelope to Nolan. Rachel knelt to her daughter's eye level. I'll treasure it and open it as soon as I wake up, I promise. She hugged Hazel for a long time, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and innocence that emanated from her. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes, though Hazel tried to be strong. You're coming back, right? I am, Rachel answered without hesitation. I'll always come back for you. The drive to the hospital was silent. Nolan drove, Rachel looked out the window, and Hazel, in the back seat, clutched her doll like a protective talisman. At the hospital, the medical team was already waiting for them. The surgery was scheduled for 11 Camasita, but there were preparations to be made, forms to be signed, final instructions to be given. When it was time for Rachel to go to the prep room, Hazel grabbed her hand tightly. I love you, Mommy. I love you more than anything in this world, Rachel replied, her voice choked with emotion. She looked at Nolan and something passed between them. Understanding, a promise, maybe even a love not yet fully admitted. We'll be here when you get back, he said simply. Rachel nodded and followed the nurse down the hall, turning one last time to wave before disappearing through a set of double doors. Nolan and Hazel remained in the waiting room. The first few minutes were tense. Hazel sat rigidly in her chair, her eyes fixed on the door where her mother had disappeared. Is it going to be long? She asked after 10 minutes that felt like an eternity. A few hours, Nolan answered honestly. Oh, the surgery itself takes about 2 hours, and then your mum will be in the recovery room for a while longer. Hazel's eyes widened. That long? Nolan could see the anxiety building in her. Sitting in the waiting room for hours, imagining what was happening to her mother, would only increase her fear. It will take a little while, he said, standing up and holding out his hand. How about we get something tasty to eat while we wait? Hazel hesitated, looking at the door again. We can ask the nurse to let us know if there's any news, Nolan assured her. Samantha Cafe is right here in the hospital, not far. Finally, she took his hand and they went down to the cafe on the first floor together. It was a simple but cozy place, with round tables and large windows that let in the sunlight. What do you want to eat? Nolan asked. Hazel shrugged, still tense. I don't know. How about some orange juice? And maybe a sandwich or a piece of cake? She nodded silently. While they waited for their order, Nolan saw a children's crossword puzzle book at the nearby newsstand. He bought it along with a colored pencil. Have you ever done a crossword puzzle before? He asked when he returned to the table. Hazel shook her head. It's like a word-guessing game, he explained, opening the booklet. Look, there are pictures that give you clues. Gradually, Hazel started to get interested. The first word she completed, cat, brought a small smile to her face. The second, sun, made her relax a little more in her chair. By the time they reached the 10th word, she was engrossed in the game, her tongue sticking out the corner of her mouth in concentration. Nolan watched her, amazed at her resilience. Children have an incredible ability to live in the present moment, he thought. It's a gift we lose as we get older. They drank juice, shared a piece of chocolate cake, and completed almost half of the crossword puzzle book. With each small victory, each word discovered, Hazel relaxed a little more. Look, I know this one, she exclaimed, carefully writing flower in the squares. You're very smart, Nolan praised her sincerely. Hazel smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. So Mommy says I'm smart just like her, and she's absolutely right. 2 hours passed almost without them noticing. When Nolan looked at his watch, he realized the surgery must be ending. I think it's time we went back to the waiting room, he suggested. The doctors should be coming to talk to us soon. Hazel carefully put the booklet and pencil in her small backpack. She seemed much calmer now, even excited to give her mother the good news. "We can show Mommy how many words we got right when she wakes up," she said, naturally taking Nolan's hand as they walked back. In the waiting room, the nurse smiled when she saw them. "We were just about to call you. The surgery is over and Dr. Quinn is already in the recovery room." "Did everything go well?" Nolan asked, feeling his heart race. "Yes, everything went as expected. The doctor will come speak with you in a few minutes." Hazel gave a little jump of joy, squeezing Nolan's hand tightly. "Mommy's okay." The surgeon appeared shortly after, still in his surgical scrubs, but with his mask down. His tired face wore a satisfied smile. "The surgery was a success," he announced. "We were able to remove the entire tumor and some lymph nodes for analysis, but what we saw was very positive. The chemotherapy did an excellent job of reducing the size of the mass." Nolan felt a wave of relief so intense that his legs felt weak. He knelt down and hugged Hazel, who, though she didn't understand all the medical terms, understood from the tone and expression that it was good news. "When can we see her?" he asked. "She's still under the effects of anesthesia, but she should wake up in the next few hours. I suggest you go home to rest for a bit and come back in the late afternoon. She'll probably be more alert then." Nolan thanked the doctor and turned to Hazel. "What do you think? Should we go home, take a shower, get the drawing you made for your mum, and come back later?" Hazel agreed, though she seemed reluctant to leave the hospital. "She's going to be fine," Nolan assured her. "Janet, there are a lot of people taking care of her here." When they returned to the hospital late that afternoon, Rachel had been moved to a private room. She was pale and looked fragile against the white pillows, but her eyes lit up when she saw Hazel run in. "Careful with the tubes, sweetie," she warned gently as her daughter approached for a hug. Hazel slowed her pace, looking cautiously at the various tubes and monitors connected to her mother. Nolan helped her carefully climb onto the bed for a gentle hug. "Are you all better now, Mommy?" "I'm on my way," Rachel replied. "The doctors took out the sick part. Now I just need to rest and get strong again." Hazel nodded seriously. "I brought your drawing." She opened her backpack and took out a colorful envelope, handing it to her mother. "I can open it for you." Rachel smiled as her daughter carefully tore open the envelope and took out a sheet of paper. It was a simple drawing, but full of meaning. 3 figures holding hands in front of a big house, obviously Nolan's apartment building. Above them, a large yellow sun and the word family, written in irregular, colorful letters. "It's us," Hazel explained, pointing to each figure. "You, me, and Nolan, at our house." Rachel felt tears forming. She looked at Nolan, who was watching from the doorway, equally moved. "It's beautiful, my love," she said, hugging her daughter carefully. "You're the most beautiful one you've ever made." 3 days later, Rachel was discharged from the hospital. The recovery would be long, weeks of rest, followed by preventative radiation therapy, but the worst was over. The cancer was gone, and the doctors were optimistic about her prognosis. Nolan helped her get settled in the apartment, turning the living room into a comfortable space where she could rest and still be part of family life. At dusk on the first day home, after Hazel had fallen asleep, exhausted by the excitement of her mother's return, Rachel called Nolan to the balcony. The place had become their shared refuge, where the most important conversations happened. "Can you walk that far?" he asked, concerned. "With your help." He gently supported her to the balcony, where he helped her sit in one of the comfortable chairs. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the city below beginning to light up. "Thank you," Rachel said after a moment of contemplative silence, "for everything, but most of all, thank you for taking care of my daughter." Nolan sat beside her, looking at the horizon. "You don't have to thank me for that." "Yes, I do." She turned to face him. "You could have just helped financially, or shown up occasionally, but you were really there. For her. For me, I wanted to be," he replied simply. Rachel smiled, a smile that reached her tired eyes. "You know, when Hazel approached you in that hospital, I was mortified. Of all the people in the world, it had to be you. And now, I think she was always wiser than both of us." Nolan chuckled softly. "She certainly is special. A comfortable silence settled between them. The city lights shone brighter as darkness fell. "What happens now?" Rachel finally asked. "When I'm completely better, do we go back to our house? Do you go back to your old life?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. "She can be mine," Nolan said softly. "If you'll let her." He paused, then added, "You both can be mine." It wasn't a traditional marriage proposal. It was something more fundamental, an acknowledgement of what they had already become, a question about what they could be together. Rachel held his hand tightly, as if to anchor herself in that moment. "She already is," she replied, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. "And so am I." Simple words that sealed a deep commitment. Nolan pulled her closer, wrapping her in a careful hug so as not to hurt her still healing scars. They held each other, without fear, without reservations. They were together. The road ahead would still be difficult. There would be more treatments, days of fatigue, adjustments to be made. But they would face it all as they had faced the last few months, as a family. A family that began with the innocent request of a 4-year-old child, grew through pain and fear, and solidified in the understanding that true love is not just a feeling, but a daily choice to stay, to care, to be present. "I think we should tell Hazel tomorrow," Rachel murmured against Nolan's chest. "Tell her what?" "That we're a real family now," Nolan smiled. "I have a feeling she already knows." Autumn brought a new phase. Rachel responded well to the preventative radiation therapy, with fewer side effects than the chemotherapy. Her hair was growing back, fine but determined, like small signs of victory. Nolan had restructured his work, more video conference meetings, more hours at home. His assistant, once used to seeing him at the office late, now smiled when he said he needed to leave early to take Hazel to her swimming lessons. The girl was back in regular school. She was happy to have friends again, to attend birthday parties, to bring home drawings to stick on the fridge that were not only hers, but also her new friends. On a sunny Friday, Nolan came home early. In the elevator, his hand clutched a large envelope in the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Documents he had picked up from the lawyer's office that morning. He found Rachel in the kitchen, preparing a snack. He kissed her softly, something that still felt new and precious between them. This intimacy had grown slowly, first with holding hands, then small kisses, and in recent weeks, shared nights in the same room, rediscovering each other with the patience of those who value every moment. "How was your appointment?" he asked. "Great. The doctor is very pleased," she smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Where's Hazel?" "The driver is picking her up from school. They should be here in 15 minutes. Before Nolan could say more, the front door opened and Hazel ran in, her backpack bouncing on her back. "Mommy, Daddy!" she shouted, throwing herself into Nolan's arms. He caught her mid-air, feeling that familiar wave of love that never ceased to amaze him. Hazel had started calling him Daddy a few weeks ago, naturally, as if it had always been that way. The first time was at the park when she ran to show him a special leaf. "Look, Daddy," she said, and continued talking as if she hadn't just transformed Nolan's world with a single word. "How was school, little one?" "Awesome. I got a gold star on my spelling test, and the teacher hung my drawing on the classroom wall." "That calls for a celebration," Rachel said, opening her arms to welcome her daughter. During dinner, Hazel chattered endlessly about her friends and her teacher. Rachel and Nolan exchanged glances over the table, the knowing smiles of proud parents. Later, after helping to clean up the kitchen, Nolan felt the weight of the envelope in his pocket. The moment had come. He went to the living room where Hazel was drawing on the rug, surrounded by colored pencils. "Can I join you?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Hazel smiled, pushing some pencils in his direction. "Sure, I'm drawing our house." "What house?" he asked, noticing that the drawing didn't look like the apartment where they lived. "The house we're going to have one day, with a garden and a swing on a tree," Nolan smiled. It was as if she had read his mind. In recent weeks, he had started looking at houses in the suburbs, thinking it might be time for a bigger space, with a yard for Hazel to play in. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Can I ask you something?" Hazel dropped her pencil and looked at him as he's curious. You can. The elaborate words he had rehearsed seemed inadequate now. Instead, he opted for simplicity. Would you let me be your dad? He asked softly. Not just in name, but for real. On paper and everything. Hazel's eyes widened, shining brighter than ever before. Really? For real? Her voice was almost a whisper of disbelief. For real, Nolan confirmed, his heart pounding. I spoke to a lawyer. If you and your mum agree, we can sign the papers that make me your legal father. For a moment, Hazel just stared at him, processing his words. Then, without warning, she threw herself forward, hugging him with all the strength her small arms could muster. You already are, she declared against his shoulder. Nolan hugged her back, feeling an emotion so intense he could barely breathe. When he looked up, he saw Rachel standing in the living room doorway, watching the scene with silent tears streaming down her face. Hazel pulled back a little, suddenly very serious. Does this mean you'll never leave again? The question hit Nolan in the chest. Even with all the security and love she had received in recent months, there was still that fear buried in Hazel's heart, the fear of abandonment. Never again, he promised. You're stuck with me forever. That made her smile again. Forever is a long time. Exactly how long I want to be with you and your mum. That night, after Hazel fell asleep, Nolan showed Rachel the adoption papers. On the last page, in clear print, was the proposed name, Hazel Quinn Briggs. It's perfect, she whispered, hugging him tightly. Absolutely perfect. 6 months later, on a spring afternoon, the adoption process was finally complete. In the same week, Rachel received the best possible news. She was officially in remission. The cancer had been defeated. To celebrate both milestones, they decided to have a picnic in Golden Gate Park. The day was perfect. A blue sky, a gentle breeze, flowers beginning to bloom everywhere. Rachel spread a checkered blanket on the grass while Nolan took food out of the basket. Hazel ran around them, chasing a colorful butterfly. Don't go too far, Rachel called out, her tone lighter now, without the weight of constant worry that had accompanied her for so long. Nolan watched them both with a sense of fullness that still surprised him at times. Rachel was now fully recovered. Her hair had grown into a short, modern cut she decided to keep. Her eyes shone with renewed energy. Life had found its balance. Rachel had gone back to school, fulfilling her dream of attending college. Nolan continued with his company, but with completely rearranged priorities. And Hazel was flourishing, secure in the unconditional love of her parents. Take a picture with me, Hazel exclaimed, running back to them with flushed cheeks. Nolan set the camera timer and propped it on the basket. The three of them posed on the picnic blanket, genuine smiles lighting up their faces as the countdown began. 3, 2, 1, flash. A week later, the photo was framed on the living room shelf. Next to it, in a smaller frame, was that first drawing Hazel had made. 3 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. Hazel insisted on writing the caption for the larger photo herself. In her careful, childish handwriting, she wrote on a piece of colored cardstock, "Our first new beginning." Rachel asked why first, to which Hazel replied, "Because life has many beginnings, Mommy. Every day is a new beginning." That night, after Hazel had fallen asleep, Nolan and Rachel sat on the balcony, as they had done so many times during the difficult moments. But now, instead of fear and uncertainty, there was peace. "Did you ever imagine on that day in the hospital that we would be here?" Rachel asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "It's not in my wildest dreams," Nolan admitted, "but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Rachel smiled. "All because of a 4-year-old who decided she needed a dad." "The wisest person I've ever met," Nolan agreed. They sat in silence, contemplating the stars and the future that lay ahead. A future that a year ago had seemed impossible. A future built not just on love, but on the daily choices to stay, to care, to begin again. As the caption written by Hazel suggested, they were only at their first new beginning. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones.